Everybody can hear me. Isn't this nice? It's like, yeah, it's like a totally new world. All right. Well, thank you all for coming and welcome. My name is Scott Pinsky. I'm this year's chair of the Marin Coalition. See many familiar faces and maybe some new faces, so for those of you who are new, welcome. Let me start by noting what we have here, which is some terrific new equipment, and this is as a result of your member dues and special donations that were provided to us through a fundraising drive we did a few months ago. We've upgraded our sound equipment. We also have a new projector so we can do whiz-bang presentations. You're going to see one of those today. So thank all of you for supporting us. We are, of course, a nonprofit, a 501c3, volunteer board of directors, and all that kind of stuff. And our speakers all present without a fee. So basically, your dues go to this kind of thing, the equipment and the room and so forth. So thank you for that. Let me begin with introductions of some of our distinguished guests. We have several members of our local governmental bodies here today. Marty Winter from the Belvedere City Council. Marty, I think I saw you. There you are. Catherine Way from Larkspur City Council. Hello, Catherine. And I'm not sure she made it, but Kate Collin was supposed to be here from San Rafael. Not yet. Okay, well, hopefully she'll join us. And you can thank her as well for a screaming donation to our fundraiser, which helped us get to our goal of getting this new sound system. So thank you, Kate. Next month, we have what I think is going to be a really special presentation, and I'd encourage you all to consider coming to that. How many of you have seen this film, Rebels with a Cause? Okay, we've got some hands. So those of you who've seen it, you know the film. This is a documentary that was made about the development, or more correctly, the non-development of West Marin, and gives the history of the politics and policies of I guess the 60s and 70s was the period that it's talking about for the most part. Many of you lived through it. I did not. I wasn't living here at the time, but this film was a tremendous education for me in terms of learning about the history of how we came to be the way we are here in Marin. We have invited and are thrilled to be having as guests next month the two filmmakers who made the film, Nancy Kelly and Kenji Yamamoto, wrote, produced, directed, and produced this film. And they won't be showing the film, but they will be talking about the making of it. They'll show some clips from it, and they will have this film available for purchase next month at the event in case anybody wants to get their own copy of it. And I think they'll also have some of their other films for sale as well. So look forward to that. We'll be sending out information on that event as well. Finally, I think the only other thing is in my pocket, my cell phone. My cell phone is off, and I would ask that you do the same with yours so that we have a nice quiet event. And with that, I'll get to today's activity, which is an update on the state of the economy in Marin and the challenges ahead. We have a very distinguished and interesting panel to talk about Marin's economy. The economy is thriving, but many people know that we're facing challenges here that impact our ability to grow and prosper. And these include the high cost and availability of housing, traffic congestion, and strong economies in other counties that provide potential workers with opportunities for employment elsewhere and prevent us from being able to attract those employees to work here in Marin. Our three speakers are Dr. Robert Eyler, Bruce Wilson, and Sam Pahlavan. Am I saying that correctly? Thank you. Dr. Eyler is the Dean of the School of Extended and International Education at Sonoma State University. He also serves as the Chief Economist of the Marin Economic Forum. He earned his PhD from the University of California, Davis in 1998. He earned a bachelor's in economics from CSU Chico, and that was in 1992. He's been a visiting scholar at both the University of Bologna and Stanford University. Bruce Wilson is Executive Director of Workforce Alliance of the North Bay, a regional workforce development board in California. Bruce began his career in workforce development in 1997 for the Napa County Private Industry Council, and he was selected as Napa County's Workforce Board Director in 2004. In his career, he's been responsible for managing complex workforce development projects and acquiring funds to support job training efforts in Northern California. Sam Pahlavan is the general manager of the Marriott Hotel in Larkspur, a position that he's held for the past 22 years. So you getting used to it? Yeah, okay. He has a master's in business administration with an emphasis on hospitality administration and management from Golden Gate University. Also, just before we begin, I'll note that Robert's presentation will be largely on the screen. He's brought a number of slides for us to review while he's talking, and those will be available on our website after the presentation. We'll be getting those up for you to see on the website. So no need to take notes if you're going to be scribbling on what you see on the screen. Robert will give an overview of the current state of the economy in Marin and the North Bay and the issues that impact the economy, including some of the challenges that businesses face or will face in the future. Bruce will talk about some additional information on the subject of how your organization is helping to address these issues and challenges. And Sam will provide some examples of the issues and challenges his business faces and how he's working to address that situation now and in the future. So we'll go one by one, and then we'll take your questions for the last few minutes of the event. Let me please welcome to the podium Dr. Eyler.
Folks, I'm just going to make sure this is going to get started here. Well, folks, thanks again for having me today. My job is to take you through the national, state, and local economy with an idea of where we're going in the future with a little bit more of an emphasis on labor. And that's the idea, and then that'll tee up what Bruce is going to talk to you about what 1B does for services. Just as a side note, I also sit on the 1B board, so I'll be very curious to see how you guys react to what both Bruce and I say. So the first stop is to talk about some national and global themes. And the reason I'm doing this is because Marin County does not live on an island, even though sometimes we think that it does. And the global and national economy definitely affects what goes on here, sometimes indirectly and sometimes directly. So what's been going on with China and the United States is sort of this posturing game over the belief that by increasing tariffs we can actually get more manufacturing jobs back in California and in the United States in general. And we're slowly seeing some evolution in terms of those tariff policies, but we're watching this because it's starting to affect our equity markets. And our equity markets have been very front of mind the last couple of months because there's been so much volatility both down and up. But as you'll see on a graph in a minute, I think I have that graph today. I do not. That's just figures. I said that, and the other 15 presentations I do, it's in there. But I'm not going to show you the S&P 500 today, but generally speaking, if you look at the S&P, we're almost back to basically square in terms of the year. And a lot of that's because we're starting to see more and more uncertainty seep into the economy. Now, with the election results from yesterday, and the Democrats taking back over the House, it'll be intriguing to see how the market starts reacting toward the end of the year with the idea that the Trump administration may have a much larger hurdle to jump in terms of moving more and more of its business agenda forward with the Democrats in the House. I believe we heard that the Republicans retain the Senate, so there'll be that slowdown now in the speed of things that Congress needs to be involved in, and the market's reacting to that. A lot of the other parts of the market's reacting I'll get to in a minute. The other things are places like Turkey. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that today, but you wouldn't believe that Turkey, of all places, would have an effect on Marin County. Well, it does because it potentially affects the ascension of our interest rates. And interest rates are a big theme in terms of where the economy is going right now, and ultimately the speed at which business investment takes place. So we think about what happens 25 miles south of here. A lot of what goes on 25 miles south of here has depended upon relatively low and stable interest rate environments. When we hear about things that are going on in Turkey that they don't know what's going on with their economy, and the Italian economy and the European economy more generally have a lot of Turkish debt on their books, the wobbliness of a place like Turkey can then reverberate through Europe and then reverberate to us. Now, it might be a second and third order effect, but the magnitude of that effect can still hurt us and can still slow down the economy, which will then ultimately affect how we do business in Marin and how we hire in Marin. And that's really the key. Real quick, this might be a little hard to see. I'm going to move through this relatively quickly. This is the most recent, even though a week from Friday the new one's going to come out, of a survey of professional forecasters on Wall Street and what they say are happening in three major items. One is real gross domestic product growth, which is the big number you hear coming out of the Trump White House about what's happened over the last 6 or 7 quarters. The forecast for that over the next few quarters is for a general slowdown from where we've been, but This forecast has been off about half a percentage point for the last 3 or 4 quarters in a row. So you'll see that quarter 3 of this year is 3%. We got the first estimate that it's 3.5, and it shouldn't deviate much from that. The forecasters on Wall Street have been more conservative about their forecast because they don't know what the effects of the Tax Act and the omnibus spending package that all came out at the end of last year and the beginning of this year will ultimately have on the economy. There's a lot of debate amongst economists as to how much there's an effect on that. But the other piece of this is looking forward. They're expecting a fade in the economy through the next 3 or 4 years. In other words, that even though the Tax Act will live with us until 2025, the actual real after inflation effects will be relatively small after next year. And you'll see that at the bottom for 2021, they're currently predicting only 1.5% for the entire year growth. But folks, we've been on a long positive run in the United States, so we have to expect some real, meaning after inflation slowdown, because prices are going to start picking back up. The other piece of this, which is intriguing and is a little bit more connected to labor, is that there's no expectation for unemployment rates to come off of about 4% for the next 3.5 years. Wow. The rationale for right now is that the supply side of the economy in terms of labor is going to pick up because people will be drawn into the labor force based on new tax conditions, continued movement of the economy forward, and demand will basically just stay up with that. So the unemployment rate is stable when labor supply and labor demand are basically equal, and that's the expectation more or less in the American economy for the next 3.5 years in the current forecast of folks that are employed to do this every day of the week. This graph actually hits the desk of what's called the Federal Open Market Committee, or the agency that sets interest rates for the United States. This is one of the graphs that hits their desk when they make that decision. This is called the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, and it is a way of measuring prices. Why is it important? Because inflation and wages have, at least historically, some connection to each other. That connection has been heavily debated over the last 20 years. But if we think about how national inflation is outpaced by state inflation in California, which is further outpaced by local cost of living in places like Marin County, those things will ripple up to wage demands at some point for the people that work here, or you will have to find workers in broader concentric circles around Marin County to where people are willing to drive for the wages you're willing to offer given the local cost of living. So when you say, what's this screwball guy giving me this graph that the FOMC sees, it's because that connection is really how we make policy. When there's a decision about interest rates to go up because we're concerned about inflation creeping over that dotted line, and it's really the red line which takes out food and energy prices, when that happens, 2 effects happen. One, the idea is that we're increasing interest rates to slow the economy down and slow down the pressure on inflation because we don't want wages to rise, but there's a trade-off in that it costs more for credit. So interest rates go up in an attempt to keep wages somewhat suppressed in their natural ascension based on prices rising. And that's how monetary policy works in 30 seconds or less. Okay? But we're watching this. Why? Because as that red line continues to creep over 2%, the Fed may be more aggressive on how it increases interest rates. So why has the stock market been a little bit more iffy the last couple of months? Is because there's more uncertainty in that number, there's more uncertainty in policy, and there's more uncertainty about the overall economy for the next few years. And people are trying to take profits off the table while the getting's good. The next graph is the yield curve. And this is the 10-year Treasury versus the 3-month Treasury. Why is this important? Because 9 of the last 10 recessions in the United States have been predicted within 24 months of this number going below 0. Okay, so maybe that got your attention away from your risotto. You'll see here that I put a heavy dark line at 0. This is the difference between 2 interest rates, a long-term rate, 10-year Treasury, and a short-term rate, which is basically like a commercial paper rate, 3 months. Recession right after that. Recession. Recession. And this is where we are today. So economists right now are predicting that we will actually, because of the ascension of rates by the Federal Reserve and the slow movement of the mortgage market, the 10-year Treasury market, and other long-term markets, we will see this yield curve dip below 0 sometime in the next 18 or 24 months, which then recent history suggests that 18 or 24 months after that, we will see more recessionary pressure. Now think about what I just told you. The forecast is down at 1.5% real growth through 2021, but there were no negative numbers on that graph. So right now, even though we're predicting this number will slip below 0, for the next 3.5 years, there's no recession predicted for the United States, which means there's no recession predicted for California either, for at least 3 more years, maybe 3.5. But then the clouds start to form, okay? And if anybody comes up here and tells you that they got it for the next 5 or 10 years, don't listen to that good stuff. One thing that is also concerning us in terms of debt markets and the way interest rates may rise is this graph. This is the prediction of the Congressional Budget Office for what our deficit is going to be at the national level through 2028. And you can see the demarcation line is the beginning of this year, which is where the actual side, 1968 to 2017, is shown in actual numbers. And 2018 to 2028 are the right-hand side of that dotted line, which is called projected. 2.9% of GDP negative in terms of we're spending more than we're bringing in taxes, to the tune of almost 3% of gross domestic product for the last 50 years, ending January 1, 2018. For the 11 years after that, 2018 to the end of 2028, it's predicted right now to be almost 5% negative. Okay, so what's that mean? It means we're going to see our debt pile get bigger and bigger and bigger because deficits currently turn into debt right after that because you got to finance it. Okay, why is this important? It's important because if the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates, which might slow down investment, which might slow down hiring, and we have to ask for a higher rate of interest on Treasury securities to sell debt at a faster pace because we're creating it at a faster pace, slows down investment because interest rates are higher, slows down hiring. That's the usual recessionary routine when interest rates start to ascend. The pressure that fiscal policy is now putting on the economy, on top of what monetary policy is doing, is slowly reversing the interest rate piece with the idea that all this money is going to hit the street and kind of act as a buffer on the fiscal side, meaning you'll have more money in your pocket because we're going to take less tax money from you, specifically as a corporation, and the government's spending more money, the genesis of this deficit. Okay? Add up all those pieces, and the so-called national context is a little murky, but for right now, net positive, maybe through 2021. California's labor market looks like this, just to kind of give you the state level. You can see the blue line is the labor force in California. So the Department of Finance does this, and for better or for worse, I'm showing you this. Tomorrow there's a meeting in Sacramento that I'm normally a part of with the Department of Finance forecasting unit in which they will update these through 2022. This is through 2021. The forecast is for about 0.8% increase in labor force for the next 3 years in California. About the same percent of employment, which means unemployment is basically not going to change, supply and demand equaling each other. And you can see that in the black graph, which is unemployment. So the good thing about this is it looks like in California, the current forecast is that hiring is going to continue. It's going to be at a slower pace. You can see the red and the blue lines have kind of flattened out from their recent trend, but not going negative, meaning, again, no recession predicted. So, quickly, California is predicted to grow faster than the U.S. over this sort of time frame through 2021, but it's not going to be amazing growth. Okay, it's just going to be continued slow slog positive, which is good. We don't want recession, so that's good. As I said, the stock market's giving us some weird sort of stomach aches, but folks, don't look at that sucker every day. Save yourself some grief. If another recession comes, a lot of economists are predicting it will originate in the Bay Area. It's very similar to the 2001 recession. And if you think about historic context, the 2001 recession was relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but originated in the Bay Area, which means the Bay Area suffered a little bit more. You may remember this, 2000, 2001, than did, let's say, Des Moines, Iowa. Okay? Des Moines, Iowa still had a little bit of wobbliness, but not as much as San Francisco, San Mateo, and San Jose did. Okay? So we're thinking because the way that the stock market is going, we're likely to see labor cutbacks at places like Facebook, Google, Netflix, Amazon, and LinkedIn and those kind of companies over the next 12 or 24 months because their stock values are going to go down. Their ability to finance through equity more growth is going to start to be suppressed. Well, about 70% of the growth of the S&P 500 over the last 4 or 5 years have been linked to about 6 companies only. 70% of growth, 6 companies' growth. So why are you also seeing some contraction in the stock market? Because people are taking those profits off the table, figuring that at some point, those prices got to come down. But there is a natural backward movement toward hiring when you can't raise as much equity as you used to be. We still know there's wealth inequality and income inequality issues. Folks, for California, and Marin County being a microcosm of California, my concern is way more about wealth inequality than income inequality. Because income inequality can be dealt with through education. The data show that. But wealth inequality is dealt with only if you have the opportunity to generate more wealth, and really it starts with buying your own home. So one of the housing things I'll come back to very briefly in a minute is that if we're going to build more rental, we're going to see the wealth inequality issue get bigger. Income might actually cruise around and get a little bit smaller depending on how we build rental, but it's not going to help on wealth. We're going to watch that very closely in California. We'll have a very bifurcated society in the next generation. Tax revenues haven't changed a lick, really, to speak of in the last 15, 20 years. We're still very dependent on capital gains and personal income taxes in this state. So a recession or some kind of economic contraction in which personal income contracts means a hole in Sacramento. So watch for that, too. And like I say, new governor, but old challenges, or what Milton Friedman used to say, new wine, old bottles. So here's Marin County in California's jobs forecast. Just hit the deck 3 weeks ago. Caltrans and the California Economy Project, which runs the California Economic Summit, which you may know is being held in Santa Rosa next weekend, just released this 3 weeks ago. And you can see that in Marin County, which is the blue, and this is California in contrast, for the next 10 years, finance jobs and construction jobs are seen as contracting in Marin County. And you may ask, wow, why? I thought Marin County was a finance center, right? Well, it's close enough to San Francisco where San Francisco is going to start taking more of those jobs. You're going to see some, at least in assumptions, contraction of headquarters to using fewer people and becoming more global. And Marin County will lose some of that. The construction piece is because we're going to import more and more workers in construction, and you're just going to have a harder time living here because of the cost of living. Those are the base assumptions behind that contraction. But you can see over the next 10 years, there is no contracted industry in California, even though there's a lot of those that are growing more slowly than Marin County. And I didn't highlight it, but you can see at the very bottom that overall, the growth of jobs in Marin County is actually currently scheduled to outpace the state in terms of percentage change, which might seem kind of a head scratcher, but a lot of it's going to feed off of how the Bay Area continues to grow, and that's how it's getting caught up in sort of the Bay Area wave. Here's another, this is more historic, but this is the growth of jobs in San Francisco since 2000. And the reason I'm showing you this is because you can really see the dot-com recession versus the Great Recession. There was more jobs contraction in the Bay Area after the dot-com recession than there was after the Great Recession. But in places like, well, in California overall, you can see there's not that contrast. And in Marin County kind of followed the state because Marin County was less exposed to the dot-com era, but we were all exposed. You can notice that V shape in the middle, the state, San Francisco, and Marin all kind of followed each other down the construction problem and then back up. Why is this important? It's important because if you look at what's been going on lately, the growth of jobs has been a little more volatile in Marin County over the last, let's say, 24 months. And San Francisco and California are both starting to slow down in terms of jobs growth. So we just saw the forecast for California, at least in its current state. This is the recent history. But the reason why the forecast is sort of this slow plodding forward movement is because the recent history is starting to show like we're getting to a point where full employment and a very tough, tight labor market is going to be around with us for a little while. And we're basically there. We basically have run this cycle out in terms of available labor. And that's kind of the upshot of that. That's happening regionally in San Francisco, statewide in California, and Marin County is sort of just trying to still find its way, but is basically following a similar trend. Okay, so that's on growth of jobs. Let's now talk about home prices. So I like showing this because I want to show you guys a contrast briefly. This is the inflation-adjusted median price of homes in Marin County, and you can see that at the height in the last decade, we are right around $962,000 for the median priced home in 2009 dollars in Marin County. And even though prices seem absolutely astronomical right now to a lot of people, in inflation-adjusted terms, we're not back at the peak we were 12 years ago. Okay, believe it or not. And that's because inflation is like this just slow-moving monster that never stops plodding along behind you. It wants to eat your wealth constantly. Okay? But the easiest thing to do is stop eating and see how inflation goes for a while, right? So we stopped eating in the Great Recession as much as we were, and prices dropped and reattracted us. But we've been cooking along, and the net effect of that is the following. But you can see that Marin County bottomed out at 623. So the former peak, 9,000 or 962,000, the bottom, 623, and where we are right now is about 890. Okay? So there are people out there who bought in 2006 who have not recovered their real wealth in their home, even in Marin County. This is what it looks like nominally. This is the story we see in the newspaper, right? But don't be deceived, right? This looks like we've actually recovered our wealth. And that's true on paper, but not true in purchasing power. Why is that important? The point I made before, wealth inequality. If I had the chance and actually bought in 2006 and was able to sustain the Great Recession and the movement of interest rates and maybe a shock to my income at home, and I just made it through because my income is not at, the 7-figure level, it's maybe at the high 5-figure level, I still haven't recovered my inflation-adjusted wealth in my home. So I'm still underwater in terms of purchasing power with what I can do with the house I bought before. Okay? So right now it's about 1.1 million, which of course gives a lot of people pause. Another thing, and I'll start wrapping up, rent versus wages. There's the delta where wages are the orange line and rent is the blue line, and that is starting to slowly creep up on wages. Okay? Why is that important? Because we talk a lot about housing burden and labor in Marin County. What percentage of your monthly income is going to your housing, right? This is one way of seeing that obviously as those two become one, at the median wage and the median rent, that means you're 100% burdened because it's costing you exactly what you're bringing in, right? But just let's be careful now. That's a monthly versus a weekly wage, right? That's not monthly wage. Or is it? No, I'm sorry, it is monthly wage. My bad. Exactly. See, it's good when you put your own notes on here. So that's the monthly piece, right? But let's look at another way of seeing this. Now, just recently in 2018, Marin County has a new #1 standing, and that is the highest median rent in California. Okay, believe it or not, it's actually eclipsed San Francisco at the median level, at the middle of the distribution. That line is the Marin County rent in 2011, 2015, and 2018 in contrast to all those other places. You can see that Marin County is a relatively expensive place to rent against a lot of other places in California since 2011, when the data we basically agree on started. But you can also see San Francisco, which I put on the left-hand side to kind of contrast everything else, has historically been higher, which makes anecdotal sense. But in 2018, Marin County actually flipped a little bit around San Francisco and is now the highest rent in California at the median. Now, why is that important? It's because if your intention is to hire people that live in Marin County, the cost of living in Marin County is now one of the highest in the state. If you look at housing as one of the key meters of what it costs to hire somebody and have them live in Marin County. So what do we expect to have come from that? We expect to have more people commuting. Okay, more on that in a second. You can see that that's where San Francisco dipped right below Marin County. It's just not quite at 100%. I'm showing you this briefly because I wanted to point out two things. One of the things we really don't do well as economists is track the self-employed. There's some estimates out there, and we all kind of wave our hands and say it's 2 years lag, and you can see the latest data I have on this graph is 2016. But the key is this. If you look, for those that live in Marin and are self-employed, the sum of those parts is about 145,000 people. And the people that work in Marin and are self-employed in 2007, right before the recession began, and that's why I started this in 2007, was a little higher than that, about 148. Historically speaking, Marin County is relatively balanced in terms of the number of people that overall work in Marin County versus the number of people that work in Marin County regardless of where they live. Okay? And it's usually the self-employed that lead to that balancing act. You can see at the bottom, it's almost dead even now. It's off by just under 600 people. Now, why is it important? Is because that does lead to commuting. So I wanted to show you this as a final wrap. This map is 2008's commute, where the dark green is the inbound worker coming from outside into Marin County. The circle is the number of people that live and work in Marin County, which is about 2/3 the number that are inbound. The sum of those parts is the total payroll employment in Marin County at the time. And then about 57,000 people who are residents of Marin County leave Marin County to go work some other place. Okay? So that leads to about a net 5,500 inbound. Okay? So we wonder why the traffic is rough both north to south and also Marin to south and east, is because you've got a lot of people on the move, right? If that's 120,000 people more or less every day of the week, and that's in 2008, that's a lot of traffic. Well, guess what's happened? In the latest data, which is 2015, you can imagine that in the last couple of years it's been exacerbated. Now you got about 133,000, almost 134 on the move, about the same amount though. Check out that number. The circle number is 42,161 in 2015. It was 42,618 in 2008. So we've actually lost about 500 people that were residents and living and working in Marin, which makes sense. The cost of living has gone up, and this is 3-year-old data, but it provides some corroboration of anecdote. And we've seen inbound and outbound rise as Marin County's generated more jobs. So what's that mean? It means that Marin County's economy locally relies a lot on inbound labor. Okay? But a lot of people that live in Marin rely on the Bay Area as their income source. And about 6,700 now net inbound. So what do we need to do? Well, I kind of alluded to some of this. The problems that we face in the labor market and are looking like they're going to continue from the national and state forecast as microcosm, or as macrocosms, I should say, of Marin County. We need education. We need training. We need programs that can rotate people into jobs either as retooling, replacing, or be ready when there's some contraction. That can help in career and wealth building. But to do that, we really need more home ownership. So one of the biggest things I feel like that is missing out there is a discussion about how we actually can build wealth rather than just income. We need both, but wealth is going to become more and more important over time. We got to think regionally, and we got to support workforce developments, and Bruce is going to talk about this in just a couple of seconds. We need to support that as a community. Marin County is notoriously a place that I think people do business, they have a job, but at the end of the day, it's really more about a lifestyle. And for the last 10 years, I've been trying to work on people becoming a little bit more business focused. If you've seen me in other areas or seen my work from Marin Economic Forum, trying to do that. But as wealth just naturally ascends and people come here from the greater Bay Area with wealth, that shift needs to be metered and shaped in a way that labor is not left behind in the breach. And that's something we're going to watch very closely. And we got to recognize there's no quick fixes. The other thing about politics, and it's kind of apropos, we had the election yesterday, is that a lot of your local politicians, are there any elected officials in here? Okay, great. David, I know you. So the idea is that we have to think that even if you want a quick fix because you're worried about re-election, there are no quick fixes. We really need consensus building and wealth building happening in Marin County for folks that aren't going to necessarily going to have it from some other place. And it's a real labor force challenge going forward. So thank you, and now I'll hand it back to Scott.
Thank you, Bob. I don't know about you. I knew all that. Let's hear from Bruce Wilson. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Wilson, Director of the Workforce Alliance of the North Bay. I never get tired of hearing Rob's presentation. It's hard to keep up with it, but I have to go back and download the presentation afterwards and really study up on it. But I always get new ideas every time I hear him talk. So the Workforce Alliance of the North Bay, as our name implies, we're all about workforce development. I like to think of economic development and workforce development as flip sides of the same coin. So we heard a lot about the economic landscape with nationally and with California and here locally. I'm going to focus in my remarks about some of the strategies that we're actually doing from a rubber meets the road standpoint to deal with the fact that, as Rob said, that unemployment is not going to go down, at least in the near future. So some of the challenges that our employers are facing now, they're going to continue to face. There's, of course, housing and transportation issues that we need to deal with, but ultimately it's about how are our businesses going to get the workforce that they need in order to maintain their productivity. So let me go through and show you some of the things that we're doing. Let me give you a little overview about the Workforce Alliance itself. We are a new organization that recently formed. So we are, as Rob said, thinking regionally. So Marin County and Napa County, Mendocino County, and Lake County have actually come together to work together on workforce development challenges. Every time I show this slide, everybody's like, well, what about Sonoma? Well, this is all a discussion. We're relatively new. As I said, we're 2 years into this regional partnership. Overall, from the regional standpoint, we have 541,000 population, 294,000 in the workforce. This is roughly in the same ballpark that Rob was just speaking about. Marin County is the largest of the 4 counties that we're working with. We do have some, our backbone training infrastructure, if you will, are our community colleges. We have 4 community college districts. Interestingly enough, one of those community college districts is actually Yuba County that provides services in Lake County. And our priority industries that we're working with at the workforce level include healthcare, advanced manufacturing, local government, and hospitality and tourism. There should be some arrows there, but if you start from your left, you can see this is how we're funded. Our budget actually starts at the federal level. Starts with the budget that the president puts through, so that's why I'm always listening very intently to the State of the Union address. Anytime I count how many times they say job training in that State of the Union to see where, what indicators we might see. At any rate, we're funded by something called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It goes to the state of California by formula. We have a California Workforce Development Board. Ultimately, we're the Workforce Alliance in the North Bay. You can think of us like a school board, if you will, and we disperse the funds to each of our 4 counties, Marin being one of those 4 counties. Services are ultimately provided by a comprehensive career center, which I'm going to focus on. There are my arrows. It was a little more flashy than I intended to be. So we provide a lot of services to job seekers. Essentially, we have career centers, and the job seekers come in. If you can think of us as like the publicly sponsored staffing firms, if you will, we go out and try to find people that might need some assistance getting work, and we will do everything we can and everything that we believe it takes in order to upskill that person, give them the resources and the skills that are necessary to sell on the open market, if you will. If you don't have skills, you stand very little chance of making it into the middle class. That's why post-secondary education beyond a high school diploma is so critical in today's economy. We do that at the Career Point North Bay Service Centers. We also have a brand new initiative, which I'll go into in a second, Bright Futures North Bay, because I think you guys could help with that. And then we partner with our industries with sharing information. We have a lot of data and information for businesses. All they got to do is call us up, and we will be able to pull that information pretty quickly. So let's just talk about the Career Point Centers. And again, I'm sharing this information from the perspective of a business, from the perspective of employers, because as I just said, we are trying to attract a number of job seekers that we're training up. But from an employer standpoint, if we have a group of job seekers in our career centers, then we have access to pre-screened applicants. So people like Sam, who's going to come up and talk about some of his employment challenges, we want Sam to come to us and get our help into placing these younger workers, older workers, et cetera, into employment. We have people on staff that can offer recruiting assistance, just like an executive search firm might do. We refer candidates to a broader partnership. We have many different partners, not just our own organization, but we work with the adult schools and the community college and the community colleges and the many different nonprofits in the community, so we can blast that job opening out to virtually our entire network to help you get a workforce. We have folks on staff that will help you do a job fair to get your employment opportunity out. And then, as I said, we partner in research and industry incubation. I'm going to focus quickly on Bright Futures, a brand new initiative that we are going to be launching here in the next several months. The first aspect of that is career ambassadors. We have some career hubs, and then we have a career explorer. And what does all that mean? Ultimately, what we have found is that our research that we're partnering with other folks on as well is that when a young person connects with somebody that works, a certain amount of times in their K through 12 education, they stand to make upwards of 18% more in their 20s than they otherwise would have. So Rob was talking about wealth creation. Well, this is a simple way to possibly do it. Let's start connecting people that have held jobs with these 11th graders, 10th graders, 9th graders, 12th graders, etc. In addition to that, we have found that when we get that connection happening, these young people are much less likely to be disengaged from employment and training altogether. There's less dropouts because we are inspiring them, we're intriguing them, we're informing them about the workforce, we're giving context to their learning. There's the author Malcolm Gladwell. Anybody know Malcolm Gladwell? He tried to answer the question, what determines success? And in the book Outliers. And what he dialed in on was opportunity, passion, and expertise. It takes 10,000 hours to get expertise. If you're not passionate about something and you don't have the opportunity, you're not going to get the 10,000 hours. So that's what we're trying to do, is ignite a passion in these young people and give them context for their learning. So career ambassadors, there's a quick graphic here. It's a cornerstone of the Bright Futures initiative. We are going to be doing a marketing campaign to try to find thousands of people that hold a job that are willing to give 1 hour of their time over the course of a year to talk to a young person. It's not a huge investment, but if we can do that, we put it in our database. I can get pinged on my phone from a teacher that might be interested in having a public administrator, for instance, talk to their young people. It's that easy. Right now, our teachers are working way too hard to get someone from the business community to talk to their class. The other piece that I wanted to focus on is this Career Explorer. We have this bus. I have this picture of the actual bus itself to show that this is not just a vision. It's actually happening. We are getting the equipment installed on this bus this week as we're talking. But this Career Explorer is intended to go out and help our employers reach a broader audience. It allows us to scale from the standpoint of, instead of having all of our career seekers come to a particular point on Lucas Valley Road, that we can go out and do neighborhood-based services. So that bus actually has 12 computer workstations. It has ability to do some live streaming. We have audio video, so when the bus goes out and talks to someone at Facebook, they will be able to live stream that interview, much like Road Trip Nation, if you've ever heard of that program. The third piece, which I don't have a slide on here, but I'm excited in that we're working with our education partners to launch a career hub at one of the high schools here in Marin. So we just purchased a lot of equipment that we'll be installing here in the next several months at a high school in Marin County to do much of what is similar on the bus. And the final piece is this EMSI information. The labor market analytics, I think, ultimately is going to help our employers make better informed decisions about how they're going to navigate these challenges that Rob just spoke about. And we have I have staff that are just so skilled at pulling this information and finding and dialing in on information that you might need from a business standpoint to make much more informed decisions. So I'll stop right there. I could go on the job seeker side. We have some brochures that I think are going to go around here that reflect some of the information that I talked about here. We would want, there you go. What we would want is that you stay informed with what we're doing and spread the word to your business community members as we try to put these people into jobs. All right, thank you.
I don't have any fancy slides following Robert and Bruce. The challenges we face are not a secret to anyone. As far as the business, especially in southern Marin, traffic patterns are very obvious. Commute time from Novato, 45 minutes to an hour. Traffic actually opens up when you get to Larkspur for the rest of San Francisco. Obviously, housing, affordable housing in general, are challenges we face. So everybody knows about that. So we get creative in how we address those to stay in business. And one of the advantages we have is that we're a 24-hour business. We're always open, never close the door. So we get to do creative scheduling. There are employees who are willing to commute to our location if it's not during traffic hours, because it's the time to commute is cut in half. Let's say if you come to work at 11 o'clock in the morning and leave at 7, you don't deal with that traffic pattern. So we have the advantage of flex scheduling. We get employees who are willing to do that. The other thing is absolutely pay is very important. How much does it take if they're going to spend an hour in the car to get to your workplace? How much do you pay? So average wage over the past 4 or 5 years, if you put it on a graph, is way up, because you need to run your business. You need to pay people, what it takes to come to work and take care of your customers. So we've done those. The other advantage being in Marin, and we talk about lack of housing and increase in traffic, it's also lack of growth for competition. So we don't have new hotels opening in Marin, even though cities always would love to put hotels, all the way around. All the cities, if you don't know, the tax from a room goes directly to the city. It doesn't go to the state. So whatever the percentage is right now, at about 12% goes directly to that city. So cities would love to build hotels. I meet 2 or 3 times a year with developers who do a pro forma of wanting to grow the hotel business. But just like housing, just like anything else, once they do the math of building a Marin, they walk away. So the last major hotel that opened in this area was in Novato, our sister property, the Novato Courtyard. That was over 15 years ago. So with that, as population grows, obviously our occupancy grows. We don't have room to grow any more occupancy. We can't add any more rooms. So what we do is we increase rates, just like home prices, rentals. So rates go up, profits go up. So in turn, we take the profit, give it back to the employees to be able to service. So the challenge is retaining those people. Obviously, providing benefits, and Marriott has a good package of benefits that we offer, not just with health care and retirement, but also travel. If you work for the company, with the rates they are now, it's basically nothing to travel and have a hotel anywhere in the world. And Marriott's up to 6,000 rooms now. So that benefit goes a long way in order to have a pool of employees to be able to do a schedule and maintain the hotel. So those are the advantages we have. As far as future, the biggest challenge for our industry, not just in Marin, and this is talked about, I was in a meeting last week in Oakland. I don't know how many of you know about the strikes going on in San Francisco, Oakland, so that's a major concern right now. If you have any questions specifically for the strike, I'll be happy to answer that for you, is housekeepers. The workforce in housekeeping is getting old, so to service those rooms is a lot of work. The new generation is not going in that line of work. So it's a major challenge for us to recruit to be able to clean these rooms going forward. So the forecast, going forward is that every hotel in any brand will have a challenge hiring housekeepers. How much do you pay for that workforce to turn a profit at that point? So the leadership at Marriott and our headquarters in Washington, D.C. is constantly pushing for immigration reform, because we know, and the caravan coming here, that's the solution. But obviously, there's a conflict right now of what you can get in. For our industry, housekeeping, cleaning the rooms is the biggest challenge we're facing in the next 4 or 5 years. As Robert mentioned, the economy looks like it's going strong. So there's growth everywhere else as far as hotels. You don't see it around here. As I talked about, it's just too expensive to build and manage a hotel property. But growth, I mean, the credit as far as the money going into building hotels is available. The biggest challenge for my peers in other markets, even in Bay Area, is new supply coming in. And to be able to, to keep your share competing with a brand new product, even if it's your own, brand. So growth is there. These rooms have to get clean. The challenges are definitely back of the house for us. But, in Marin, we manage it as well as we can. As I said, it's just the revenues been record growth for the past 5 years. Occupancy, is flat at this point. There's nowhere to go for it, so it's in rates. So when you have the profits, you in turn, pay people to be able to run the business. So we're fine in that regard. Bruce and I talked before lunch about being able to recruit, use the resources he has available to us, to be able to do that. But, it's a concern going forward. And really, those are the things that I have to share. Not a lot, but I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, sir.
Comments on hotels versus B&Bs?
Is it off?
Let me take the mic around. We'll do the questions. Okay. And I think if you want to take the
Sure.
answer from the table. Sorry, where were you? Okay.
Shall I repeat the question?
No, I heard you. It's hotels versus Airbnbs. Major concern for our industry over the past 5-6 years as Airbnb has grown. Biggest challenge has been, to be able to regulate Airbnbs and for them to be, paying their fair share of taxes. And so government, is part of this process, helping regulate, helping fine. And just yesterday there was an article with a huge fine for an Airbnb in San Francisco. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was in the millions. So that's the start of being able to regulate, to be able to fine an Airbnb that's illegal. So for them to be, paying their fair share of taxes, for us to be on a level playing field, it's happening. Slowly, but it's happening. Policing it has been the biggest issue.
We have a question here.
This is for Rob, please. Can you tell me... Okay.
I'm listening.
Yeah, we know. Can you tell me what age you consider the workforce, and how does age, as it gets older, play out in your statistics?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. The statistics, generally speaking, when you talk about labor force, end at age 64. So the classic labor force definition is the ages of 18 and 64, but we know that, depending on where you are in the United States, shifts all over the place. The Census Bureau has what it calls its quarterly workforce indicators, and you can look at every county in the United States and look through, I think, the last quarter of 2017 back to the last quarter of 1991 to get the age of the workforce based on payroll surveys and what payroll taxes that are put into the government. And that'll give you every age up to 99. So if you look at that data, so I didn't give you that data. I kind of gave you the higher level data because we were a little pressed for time. But if you look at that data, you'll see that especially since the 1990s, Marin County's age demographic and profile has moved to the right, meaning to an older profile, and it's moving at a slightly faster pace than, let's say, California as a whole. But even places like San Francisco, where you think is this sort of hotbed of young, hot talent, where you're drawn from all over the world, almost like Los Angeles has a lot of young talent drawn from all over the world for entertainment. The techies all drawn to San Francisco. Los Angeles, even Western Los Angeles and San Francisco have all moved the same direction, but just not the same speed. So Marin County, for a county that's got 260,000 people in it, is aging more rapidly than any county its size in California. So, and the workforce, but we're tracking the workforce not really in real time with about a 12-month lag in terms of its age. Oh, sure, and I'll just say the question out loud.
Don't we need statistics from 64 and on because the age of people who either work or want to work is much older now?
Yeah, so the question was, don't we need statistics for that older age group if in fact we have a lot more participants in that age group? Is that a good way of restating the question, Laura? So the answer is we have them, but they're not normally what's seen in the newspaper. So when you hear about the labor force, when it's talked about in a newspaper article, or what the general person would see that doesn't know about the census database that I know, or how to manipulate it in a way that's quick, that's stuff that's not talked about. So that number is really 18 to 64. We absolutely, in places like Marin County, need to do that. And Marin Economic Forum's been doing that for 10 years. So if you have the email on my last slide and you have a question about that, I can send you the data very quickly. Of course.
Can I just offer another perspective on that? From a workforce standpoint, when you have 2% unemployment, that's virtually full employment. And so if our businesses like Sam's are going to end up addressing some of their workforce shortages, we're going to have to start looking at traditionally untapped labor pools, such as those that have retired. The younger workers are also unemployed at a much higher rate than the general population. Veterans, people with disabilities, those that are speaking English as a second language. So those populations are they're unemployed at a much higher rate. So there's folks there that are still trying to get jobs, and we need to upskill those folks so that they can do it and make a match.
And Bruce didn't say it, but Workforce Alliance in the North Bay does exactly that work.
Over here. With the new federal tax policy that caps deductions for property tax and state income tax to $10,000, and disproportionately hitting California in many ways and other states, are you looking at how that may hit home values or the Marin area market because of that real high valuation here and the cap? And you're nodding your head, so I'll stop talking.
Well, that's okay. I'm sorry. I have a bad habit of jumping ahead at what I think you're going to ask, and it's a bad habit. There's been a lot of debate about whether or not the new tax legislation will actually affect negatively labor markets in places like Florida, California, and New York. We have seen a slowdown in the ascension of prices in California, and economists are wrestling whether or not that is a preemptive move by buyers and sellers to change the conditions of the supply and demand in a way that actually would force prices down because basically the buying behavior has ended given the cycle, versus people saying, whoop, I'm not buying anymore because I don't want to take on this now lack of tax deductions because of the new cap against what's actually out there in inventory. It's very difficult to discern what's causing the other one or whether or not they're somehow intertied with each other. But certainly it was an indirect punitive strike, the way the tax code ended up, on places that are relatively Democrat versus Republican when that tax law came down. Absolutely. So it should lead to some, what an economist would call a distortion in buying activity, and we're probably seeing some of that, but what percentage of the recent slowdown in housing prices is a function of that I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But we should expect some behavior change for sure. Now, that's part 1A of your question. Real quick on part B, which is what's that actually going to do to the marketplace, and because you kind of had that in there too. And the answer is it might have a short-term effect, but it probably will not affect the medium and the long-term trend. So don't worry too much. But again, it depends on how you're looking at houses. If it's a buy and hold because you want to live here, you shouldn't worry about it. Just buy and hold.
Okay, this is a question about your comment about wealth, a focus on wealth acquisition or measuring wealth rather than income. So just understanding that there's been more people moving into rental rather than home ownership, and that typically home ownership and wealth management has been linked to owning assets. Mm-hmm. So I didn't hear you talking about assets and how that wealth and assets get connected. And what do you see it means as a trend where more and more people are feeling like they can't own a home, and so they don't have that as wealth management, and even that we're encouraging people to get out of and get rid of their cars as what might have otherwise been a major asset that people would own? Where do the assets come from?
Well, the assets come from savings, regardless of how you hold your savings, right? I mean, remember, a home is just one of many potential portfolio assets you may have in terms of your own personal wealth management. Generally speaking, a car is a bad asset to have unless you absolutely need it, right? Because it depreciates as soon as you drive it off the lot and continues to depreciate, where you could actually save that money against the cost of public transportation. And this is many advocates out there that's exactly what's going on. There's a sharing economy argument that's coming. There's an electric car, which David wanted me to say something about it. There it is. That there's an electric car potential revolution coming alongside of ride sharing in which it will be driverless and you'll see a lot of metropolitan area folks abandon their own cars for the betterment of a shared ride. There's a lot of theories running around about that. So the nature of it is that your home and your education are usually the two best investments you can make with debt. So if you're going to ask somebody who doesn't have the income to purchase a home to take on debt, right, A, the home has to be available, and B, it's still got to be viable in terms of their own income trajectory to continue to stay in it. In places like Marin County, the speed at which the gap exists between what I can afford and what's available has consistently grown as prices have gone up. And this is not a new trend, but in terms of Marin County specifically, people are going to struggle probably as far as the eye can see with that issue. But that's where other areas of California you may see more burgeoning business activity and labor activity because the two match up more clearly with each other. One of the biggest problems with Marin County is there's a fade out there in which it will become a gigantic golf course community, golf course in quotes, because you'll have the haves who own and want to root themselves here ad infinitum, and those that do not, that commute in to service those that have. And there'll be some swirl of, public safety, teachers, and folks that they want relatively close that they've made some accommodation for. But other than that, it'll basically lead to a bifurcated society. That's one potential vision. We'll see how it goes. But that's what I meant by wealth and the asset piece.
Well, that's a perfect lead-in. I was just going to ask you to look into the crystal ball and tell us what you see in terms of changes in the local economy. What are some of the changes that you see with retail going out and the Amazon effect? What are the businesses and opportunities that are coming, do you think? And then what does Marin have that's special about it that could attract different types of businesses? And what would they be? Anybody can answer this.
Wow. I'm tempted to hand that off because that's a big question. But I'll get started and we can run around a little bit. In my mind, two things are going to happen, or at least possible. So we feel like that old school retail is going to slowly die. And we're seeing some fits and starts of that now. It would be good to have a better vision about how we utilize that space in terms of either mixed use, housing overall in places we weren't, and have some more zoning flexibility philosophically. We'll see if that happens. That'll lead to a lot more construction demand than we expected also, rather than just letting those places lie fallow, which normally happens in some kind of a contraction. The second is that Marin County, because of its proximity to the Bay Area, still has the opportunity to attract businesses that we think normally are born, stay, and grow in the Bay Area, but it needs to be more aggressive in the way it does economic development to bring those up. And then that can lead to Marin County being maybe a little bit more like San Mateo County in terms of the dynamics of jobs. We have some sprinkle of what San Mateo County, if you don't know, has a relatively good bioscience cluster in a couple of places, and much larger than the one we have, but we tout a lot in Marin County. We're really dwarfed here by what happens in San Mateo County in some ways. Those kind of things I think can still live on in Marin County, but I don't see, let's say, a new dynamic economy coming to Marin County alone that differentiates it, probably at least for the next 10 years. It's very tough because there's no real history of that happening, and I'm an economist, so it's dismal. What can I say?
I think one of Marin County's greatest assets is that population is very well educated. So that's one of the first things that a higher-end Class A business, so to speak, would be looking for is just the educational levels, and Marin County's got it. The other thing I would say, so just coming back to whether it's life science or bioscience, that's a good place to start if I were a company, is looking who could do it. The other thing is I like to look, I talked about some of the data that we provide. I look at what Marin County businesses are spending and where they're spending it. So, for instance, when you look at the wine industry in Napa, you see that they're spending $50 million a year on machine tool technologists, which is actually a pretty good, machine tooling, which is actually a pretty good job, good wages. And then when you look at where that money is going, $49 million is going out of county because they don't have any machinists in Napa. So if you want to keep your money in Marin, so to speak, or in the region, start looking how can we support the businesses that are already here?
Well, I just think zoning is a big part of it, and also government needs to be willing to, be more flexible in allowing businesses to grow, maybe buildings to be 4 or 5 story high to grow. So that's the challenge. We've had many businesses that have done business with us in the past, and as they started growing, and this is over the past 15 years, they moved to the East Bay just because they couldn't, grow and house their employees in one location. So some more flexibility would help this whole process. But of course, that's, that's the story into itself. That's a whole separate conversation. Yeah.
Quick comment. If we purchase electricity to power vehicles, it's a locally spent dollar. If we purchase gas, it's a dollar that goes to Texas or to the Middle East. Think about the recycling possibility there. Sam, wild idea. Do you think that there's any desirability either on the part of owner-operators of hotels or on the workforce if a town or community said, okay, you can build 150-room hotel if and only if you also build 15 to 20 units of affordable permanent housing?
I think there is. The price of the land obviously is, and building, price of building. The pro forma is always comes up short just because the economy the way it is now does not last. Our business is always cyclical, and it's usually been within a 5-year cycle of, if you look at a graph, up and down, 5 to 6 years. This current cycle of over 10 years is not common. So that's always the fear of somebody investing that chunk of money into a business that's dependent on the economy thriving and for your business to do well. So, yeah, right now is not the time to talk about that just because we're at a 10-year cycle, and we talk every year with budgeting. It's coming to an end. It keeps going, but, if somebody is going to invest that much money, they need somewhere. So it probably will be a conversation when the cycle ends at the start of the next cycle. To grow in Marin would be then. Just because based on this, maybe you can see the next one being, as long. It's just right now doesn't look like anybody's willing to invest that much at the end of a long upcycle. That's the way I see it.
Okay, we have time for other questions if anyone has. If not, then wait, over here.
This is to Sam. About the strike, couldn't let you go without one question. Why didn't the Marriott meet with the San Francisco supervisors?
The demands from the union at this point are unreasonable, so they need the union to move some of the numbers they're asking for. Marriott has not really made a public statement. As of the last talk, there was a request of 70% increase in wages, which is not something you can really have a conversation with, to have a 70% increase. Obviously, that's a number they probably are looking at 35, but the starting point of 70% is not something they will even get into negotiation with. So that's really been the key. The union is asking for a number that Marriott is not even willing to sit down and discuss. So that's where it is. We're at the month and a half right now, and it's just, it's a stalemate. And one side is hoping the other one buckles. Hasn't happened, and it's just ongoing. But the demands are way too high, and I understand where they're coming from. As I spoke about my business and revenues growing rates, I don't know if you've seen hotel rates in San Francisco, but most weeks on a Tuesday, Wednesday, which is typically the busiest nights for our hotels, the business travelers on the road every Tuesday and Wednesday. Monday, maybe they're staying home, but Tuesday, Wednesday, they're on the road. Average is close to $1,000 per night in San Francisco. Average, and I shop that weekly. My hotel in Marin averages close to $400 on a Tuesday, Wednesday. Now, they see that growth, the union wants a part of it, but that's not sustainable. Once you give the increase to an employee, that number never comes down. The rates right now, it's just, to me, it's artificial. If you pay $1,000 per night for a room, it's not going to sustain. So once that drops, and it drops, it doesn't drop by 50 or 100. It's going to go in half, less than half. So the wages will not go down. So that's the formula that's not working. That's just the numbers that, again, we're at the end of a long cycle. Marriott's looking at sustainability long term, so they can't negotiate or agree on an unreasonable request. And that's Marriott's, not my position. I'm just repeating the memo that I get. So it's, it's very unfortunate.
If I may, a question for all three. I've always seen a lot of times the subsidized housing and the opportunities that we provide for many people that clearly need it so that they can be part of our active community. I see it maybe as a way of subsidizing the business arm. In a sense, how I also see it is if the business did not have the opportunity of the subsidized housing, they would not be able to employ people for a lower wage. So my question to you is, why wouldn't it be more reasonable if we knocked off all the subsidized housing and have the businesses that make the profit say, okay, then I have to pay you a fair wage so you can afford to live here, and basically share that profit?
I agree. And we're doing that. And my small business, we are doing that, as I mentioned. We are paying higher wages, and, it's something that you have to do in order to stay in business. But the question is really, larger than for me to answer. It's just, but I do agree.
Boy, I don't know how to answer that question. Let me think about it a little bit.
So in terms of the sort of this trilemma that all businesses face, you can't have your people close, have them paid a high wage, and in a sense have sustainable businesses all at the same time. But it's something normally gives. So what do? We have long commutes that then take advantage of lower cost places to live, for which we may see a wage ascension, but we're basically pushing that off to another place and saying, let's put a bunch of quote unquote affordable housing here where there's the wage ascension you need is slowed down because the cost of your housing is, in a sense, capped at a certain growth rate. Right? We are constantly moving around. We can't convert all units to that. So one of the things that's very tough is if you got rid of all subsidized housing, you would still face the wage increase. You just have longer commute times, unless you were willing to build relatively high skyward rentals to deal with the density of the workers you need. So as long as the economy is moving forward and you still need more workers, the outcome of that is either to try to provide some kind of local affordable housing to reduce the commute times and thus reduce the wage demands, or import the wages, or import the workers from a place that has naturally lower cost and hence a lower ascension of wages.
If we pay the people more money from the profit that the business is making by lowering their taxes as opposed to sustaining this additional housing, people would be able to afford with dignity to buy them. And basically the corporation might not make the same margin of profit, but it benefits the entire community.
Is there a microphone anywhere? I'm missing the whole of this myself.
I'm sorry?
Could you use a microphone?
He'll
It's not
repeat
in the
it.
room.
He'll repeat it.
Well, go ahead. It's a little more complex, I think, than that.
All right, we'll go ahead.
I'm sorry to re-explain that, but it's just my thinking. I've always questioned why, if the business, and trust me, I'm very pro-business, but if the business is making a profit to be sustainable, and it has to make a profit or it won't be a business and it won't be around. But if instead of garnering more money, and even if they're paying in taxes to support more programs to create affordable housing, if instead they said, okay, we have this larger profit, why shouldn't they be paying the individual so the individual had the right to make their own decision where they want to be, have a greater dignity instead of all the affordable housing? Because then they could say, if you want me to work here, you're going to have to pay me more. Great, now that you can pay me more, I can afford to live here and actually participate in my community.
So the key is the conversion of that idea from rental to home ownership. And at some point, you're going to run out of housing units. So at what point does the escalation of the cost stop? So if I say to you, I say, I'm going to tax you at a higher rate as a business because I need to basically redistribute that income to these people here who need that income boost to be able to get in their own homes and build wealth. And on the surface, that sounds great. What'll happen is two things right away. You'll see some exodus of businesses on the margin who don't want to pay that tax and will go to a lower tax environment. That'll be part one, guaranteed. How much, it's hard to know. But the second is at some point when the supply and demand of the housing becomes closer to each other, the housing prices will rise, and then will you be able to stay up with the pace of that housing? And Sam just gave a beautiful example of this with the union situation. What happens when your income contracts as a business, which is guaranteed to happen? Are you going to go back to those same homeowners and say, hey, guys, guess what? We can't continue this anymore, so now prices are going up, and you're not going to get as much of a wage increase, and that's it. You can't go back from those kind of contracts in that sense. It's very tricky as a balancing act. So there is no good solution here, I guess is the best thing to say. There's no panacea, so don't look for it. It's really a balancing act between what you have supply and demand-wise in housing and what your businesses are willing to tolerate in terms of costs. And Marin County's been sort of skating on that gray area for 4 decades. It's tough.
All right, I think we're going to have to leave it there. We're running out of time. Let me thank our 3 speakers for excellent presentation. And I suspect they'll hang around for a few minutes for any follow-up if anyone has a specific question. Once again, next month on the 5th, we're doing Rebels with a Cause. Should be a very interesting program. We invite you all to join us again for that. And thank you for coming today. Bye-bye.